House webinar on work zone performance measures. My name is Brad Sant, and I'm Vice President of Safety and Health for the American Road and Transportation Builders Association, as well as the Project Director for the Work Zone Safety Information Clearinghouse. Today we are pleased to have two very well-schooled presenters on work zone safety performance measures, and we're honored to have them with us. Our first presenter this afternoon will be Tracy Scriba, who is a work zone safety specialist in FHWA's Office of Operations. She has been with the Federal Highway Administration for 9 years, and prior to that worked as an area consultant in the areas of transportation and environmental. She has led Federal Highway's efforts related to work zone safety and ITS, performance measures, best practices, and implementation of work zone safety and mobility rule. She's also secretary of the TRB Work Zone Traffic Control Committee. This afternoon, Tracy is joined by Jerry Ullman, who is a senior research engineer at the Texas Transportation Institute at Texas A&M University. Jerry holds a PhD in civil engineering from Texas A&M and has been with TTI since 1985. He is also chair of the TRB Work Zone Traffic Control Committee and is a member of the National Committee on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. He has authored nearly 100 papers and articles and technical reports. He is a registered professional engineer in the state of Texas and is also the manager of the Work Zone Clearinghouse at TTI. So we're grateful to have both Jerry and Tracy with us, and we'll turn the time first over to Tracy.
Hello, good morning and good afternoon. I'm going to start off our presentation today on performance measures by describing a little bit about what work zone performance measures are and why they're important, and try and dispel a few myths about performance measures and just kind of introduce some of the challenges involved, and then turn it over to Jerry to walk us through some practical applications and how we can actually implement performance measures in our agencies. So to start it off, to define work zone performance measurement, essentially it's determining progress or a level of attainment towards specific defined agency objectives. So as an agency, if we want to make sure our work zones are safe and they're efficient, they provide for reasonable traffic flow, how do we do that? Well, one way we know if that's happening, we need to have some kind of objectives and measures to assess that. So areas that measures can be categorized into or safety and mobility, as well as customer satisfaction is a frequently used measure, and then also looking at agency or contractor efficiency and quality, because obviously, ultimately, we're out there to build the projects, and we want to do them in a way that provides for reasonable and safe traffic flow. Using performance measures helps us have some evidence or hard data to make our decisions by, so that's a key element of having measures. So following on that, why are measures important? And why can they help us? Why are they useful to us? Well, first of all, having specific performance measures can help us quantify work zone impacts. How are work zones affecting motorists? How are they affecting the safety and mobility in the work zone? How are they affecting the safety of workers as well? There are some of the decisions we make that can affect worker safety as well. And what actions are we taking to mitigate impacts? That can be using certain kinds of devices, that can be using certain kinds of strategies, that can be even things like accelerating construction can have a positive effect on work zone safety and mobility. And what are the effects of those actions that are taken? So trying to quantify that is one reason to have measures. Another reason, this is kind of a category of reasons, is to guide investment decisions, policy development, and our program priorities. So having some sort of measures can help us identify trends. Are our work zones getting safer? Are we doing a better job of mobility in our work zones? So if we look at trends over time, it can help us assess not just did one project go well, but are we doing a good job, a better job overall? As a result of that information, we can refine policies and procedures. For example, if we have a work zone policy that we're not going to allow more than 15 minutes of delay, do we know if we're meeting that? Do we know if that's a reasonable objective? And so if we have some data to look at that through our measures, we can assess those kinds of policies. Maybe we have a policy to use liquidated damages for lane closure restriction violations. Is that policy seem to be effective, for example? And then they can emphasize accountability in our agency, and that's true of performance measures across the board, no matter where you're applying them. Another area that performance measures can assist us in work zones is to help us communicate about work zones and produce some outreach. For example, as agencies, we're doing a lot to help make our work zones safer and to provide for effective traffic flow in our work zones and through our work zones. And so are we able to tell that story? Are we able to explain, to the public, well, we're doing A, B, and C to cause less pain on this project, and even though it may not always be obvious to the public, we can help tell our story better if we have some measures and some data to back that up. So that can facilitate better public understanding and better acceptance of what we're doing out there. And then it can also ensure that elected officials have the correct information. There's been various situations where an elected official had an unfortunate experience traveling through a work zone with a big delay, and that sometimes resulted in a policy that maybe wasn't as helpful as if we'd been proactive in developing our own policy ahead of time and been telling our story along the way. So that's one advantage. If we have some performance measures, we can help explain that better to the public and to elected officials. And that's one reason, these various reasons about the value of work zone performance measures is the reason why we included work zone data in the updates we made earlier in 2004 to the Work Zone Safety and Mobility Rule. The overall goal of the rule was to better understand and manage work zone impacts. So there are several provisions in the rule, I won't go into detail into them now, but that cover 3 areas to help us better manage and understand impacts. One was impacts assessment, basically what kind of impacts do we think we're going to have on an upcoming project and what kind of impacts actually result. And then to use data to make improvements on a given project. If we're seeing an issue out there, if we have some data to back that up, it can help us identify what's going on. And then also to use it to make improvements, as I mentioned earlier, in policies over time. So that can be a helpful reason to have data. So at those 2 levels. And then process reviews. The rule requires a comprehensive work zone process review every 2 years, and having some data from some performance measures to use during that every 2-year assessment can be very helpful for making improvements to policies and practices. Just to mention a little bit more on those data provisions, because that's where a lot of the performance measure aspect fits in. I mentioned they're kind of at the project level and at the process level. And the reason for that is if we can identify an issue on an ongoing project, we certainly, if we're having some crashes out there, we certainly want to solve that now. We don't want to wait till we look at a bunch of projects down the road to make an improvement on the project. At the same time, if we're seeing similar issues crop up over time on several projects, that may mean that we maybe need to revise some of our standard designs, for example, to better implement that on future projects so we can avoid problems. So that's kind of the reason for having 2 different levels. And then, of course, you need to have some way of managing that data, so the rule recommends having some kind of whatever resource might be helpful to do that. Just to give one snapshot of work zone performance on a national basis, this is a tool that Federal Highway created early in the 2000s. Actually, we implemented it in 2003. It's the work zone self-assessment. The colored bars, the sets of colored bars on the graph, represent 6 different areas in the self-assessment. And there are questions, 46 in total, spread across those 6 areas. And it's basically our division offices in each state and Federal Highway work with the state to help the state assess practices in those 6 categories. And so it's asking about, about the policy section. You're asking, do they have a policy, for example, or a goal for work zone safety? And then the evaluation section on the far right would, for example, be asking, are they, is the agency collecting some kind of data to evaluate that measure? And then in between, you've got things like what's happening during design and what's happening during construction to help manage traffic, for example. So there's a lot of practices covered in there. As you can see, look across those colored bars, there's definitely been improvement since 2003 in each of the 6 areas. The evaluation section, which is part of what we're talking about today with performance measures, is the area that has lagged the most across the country on average in terms of work zone practices. And just to clarify the scale is a 0 to 15 scale, and it's done on basically where are you in the stage of developing measures and implementing or developing practices, implementing them, and then assessing them. So actually at the point of 7 to 9 is when an agency starts to implement a practice. So with the 10.3 national average on the scale across all the questions, that means most agencies are in the next step, which is starting to assess how is that practice working. We've been implementing it for a little while. How is it working? So as you can see with the 7.5 in program evaluation, we're kind of still early in the implementation stage of using measures and collecting data to assess those measures. To get the presentation back up here. Okay, so let me talk now about a few myths related to work zone performance measures and try to dispel those because I know I've heard them certainly from plenty of people as, gosh, this idea of work zone performance measures sounds daunting. It sounds overwhelming. So, you know, what can we do that may be more within our reach? So one, I think, myth is that measurements must be obtained for all work zones. It's an all or nothing. If we don't obtain them for all our work zones, which is just too big of a task, then might not be useful. Well, the reality is you can get useful information for monitoring a set of key work zones or a sampling of work zones. It needs to, you know, making a decision based on one project, you know, changing a policy based on one project might not be wise, but do we need to have that information on all of our projects, you know, the thousands of projects that are out there every day? No. Monitoring a sample can still provide helpful information. Another possible myth is that measurements must be continuously done. If you're going to monitor a work zone, maybe you're not monitoring all the work zones, but you need to monitor those work zones 24/7. And the reality is, if you obtain key measures at the right time, that can still provide some helpful information. For example, if you know, maybe some sampling of travel time runs are done to assess overall mobility in the work zone. Well, it could be that at key times, like a new phase change, there's monitoring done for a week. And then if it seems stable, the mobility out there seems stable by those travel time runs, then maybe it's not necessary to be monitoring the next few weeks until another alignment change or, you know, is done and the traffic is affected in a different way. Another possible myth is a lot of time and money must be spent on data collection. It's the only way to get anywhere to get something useful out of it. And I would say that depending on the project characteristics, there are some low-cost data collection methods that may be available and appropriate. Some of those are manual, some of those use technology, some of those make use of existing data that the agency may already have, such as in a traffic management center. So it doesn't necessarily mean a lot of time and money must be spent. Does it mean some effort must be spent? Yes. So it's not no effort, but it doesn't necessarily mean a lot. Essentially, a way to look at work zone performance measurement is that it's a tool that an agency can use to help accomplish its mission more effectively, to do it smarter, to maybe do it more efficiently. I'm going to transition now to the second area of the presentation, which Jerry Ullman's going to talk about. And this is kind of, well, how do we actually make this happen? I've kind of talked at the higher level and introduced a number of the concepts, and then Jerry's going to provide some specific ways that you can actually implement it in your agency.
Thank you, Tracy. I think you did a really good job of laying the groundwork for work zone performance measurement. And what I want to do the next few moments here is to lay out a process, talk about some of the key issues with respect to that process that agencies could follow. Those that are thinking about, well, how do I go about initiating and starting a process like this? As part of work that TTI has done with Federal Highways with Tracy, put together a primer on this process. We've come up with a fairly straightforward 7-step key things to think about process here. Got them listed here. We've got a few slides talk about the details and specifics under each of these. One of the first things that you need to do, or that agency should strongly consider in the implementation of a work zone performance measurement process program, if you will, is to recognize and identify the key stakeholders. Without knowing who your stakeholders are, who your targets are, it's a little challenging to figure out what measures you need, what your goals are, and as well as knowing kind of what we're going to try to strive to get to. The stakeholders can help define these and help you point your ship in the right direction, if you will. They're also useful from the standpoint of champions. One of the things we'll talk about is the need for data, the need to put resources to this, having the folks that have the authority over those resources and having them understand and see the importance of it is key to being able then to obtain those resources and move this activity forward. Selecting the measures. That may seem fairly straightforward. You got to have measures to monitor. Of the many things that seem daunting, that this itself could seem daunting. How many do I need? Do I need to have hundreds of measures? Or what should I be measuring? Those kinds of things. Basically, you don't have to bite off the whole catalog to start with. I mean, you can do this in an incremental process. We would recommend you start figure with what your goals, your targets are that you've identified with your stakeholders. You initially try to keep that number of measures down to a few key ones, the ones that keep it manageable, keep them appropriate to get into your targets. As you're selecting those measures, keeping in mind what data is needed to compute or estimate those measures is also very important. It doesn't do a lot of good, obviously, to have a measure that there's just no way to get the data at the projects you want in order to calculate it. So, and again, as I said earlier, start simple. You learn. This should be a learning process. As part of what Tracy said. Measure the whole idea of process reviews is to build upon knowledge, build upon successes. So certainly starting simple, learning from it, and revising as you go along, and refining is certainly, we think, the way to go. What kind of measures are we talking about? We've got 3 here. Those that relate to the exposure. Certainly becomes a key ingredient in mobility and safety measurement, both from a standpoint of normalizing and also understanding things like capacity, impacts to capacity, those kinds of things. Work activity from the standpoint of worker safety, understanding how much exposure from that standpoint is also important. Safety, you could have. I think most agencies have access to crash data through their statewide crash databases. Some have gone beyond that and do their own data collection at work zone crashes. It's certainly a key data source. Even if you don't, though, there's other agencies have found the use of surrogates, speed-related measures, other types of measures as good indicators of safety that they can use and make good decisions on. Mobility, queues, travel times, those kinds of things. Travel time reliability in those areas where there's full instrumentation and reliability is a key performance measurement already. Tracking that from a work zone perspective is very useful. And then the use of agencies' own quality ratings, inspection scores, those kinds of things can be as valuable, as well as getting information about the customers themselves through surveys, through the online requests for information, and even to the point of receiving, documenting, analyzing complaints that are received. Some of the sources of the data that I was talking about, those on the previous page tend to be the kinds of places, measures. Sources of some of that data that I was referring to are listed here. Certainly information about the work zone, both from the overall design of it, from project plans and that kind of thing, as well as day-to-day activities is critical. Traffic data is also a key a bit of useful information. Some places you have access to real-time data of actual work zones. Other locations you may be limited to historical data or estimates, and the best you can do is try to assess whether you had a much different traffic demand at that location during construction relative to before conditions or something like that. Manual counts can be important, and if you're in an area where you've got say a permanent traffic management system with real-time surveillance, accessing and using that data is also a good data source itself. Safety data, so I've listed some of the key sources of data from those. Certainly the statewide databases, occupational safety records of the agency or of the contractor records themselves can be helpful. Field review can be an important source of data, and in some locations, using the dispatch logs of either the service patrols and/or their EMS response units in the area can be a surrogate of safety, and something that in some cases can be accessed more quickly than other data sources, and can be a valuable source of data. Mobility data is probably one of those the more challenging ones. It's a key measure metric we're interested in, and can be something that in and of itself is challenging to obtain. Certainly electronic, as I mentioned, the permanent traffic management center locations with real-time surveillance is if you've got that very good source of data, potential source of data. Another good source that some states have tried to and are working to implement is the actual just simple documentation of queues and queue links. Many of our projects are on locations where we normally don't experience high levels of congestion or queuing. The work zone comes in, and if a queue develops, obviously we know that it's due to the work zone, and by documenting how long it grows to, what the duration is, we can make some pretty good estimates by closely documenting when they occur, how often they occur, those kinds of things. Certainly travel time runs themselves are useful, and sometimes those are done in conjunction with queue length estimates. Some agencies have looked at hiring interns during their busy construction system and put them in charge of gathering that kind of data. So those all could be good sources. If you don't have access to actual travel time data, things like inspection scores, agency inspection scores, if they document that a project is experiencing some congestion when they're out there, can be by looking at that in a systematic manner, a good source of data. Surveys, responses can be helpful. As I said earlier, complaints and the number and frequency or location of those as a data source. Just a little bit about differences in types of electronic surveillance sources. I think most of those in the field are familiar with traditional sources, the spot sensors that are put out in the field. They track speed, they track volume, they track lane occupancy. You can use those if they're located in the right locations and spaced closely enough as a very good source of data. You're obviously in a permanent installation, limited mostly to the locations where they already exist, and can make use of that. Many work zones, or more and more work zones, are deploying portable work zone ITS systems. That itself can also be a source of data for performance measurement. It's typically being implemented for other reasons, traveler information, those types of things. But by ensuring that the data that's being gathered for that purpose is being archived and stored in a way that you can come back and access it. Good source of electronic traffic surveillance data. And then in the last couple of years, there's been a expansion or increase in improvements, if you will, in devices that are fairly quick to deploy. We've got devices on trailers that are self-contained, solar powered, can be installed fairly quickly. Many of these work zone ITS deployments make use of those. There's either those or even even quicker, that are self-contained in drums and other types of traffic control devices that can be is almost instantaneously put out and provide useful data. Another emerging source of data that can be used for performance measurements are the devices that allow us to get point-to-point travel time data. There's a number of those listed here, locations where you've got toll lanes, certainly can utilize toll tags and obtain point-to-point travel times through toll tag reader, anonymous toll tag reader, matching, that kind of a thing. Automatic vehicle location systems on fleet vehicles can be used. Typically, access to that kind of data can be a challenge, but certainly is, depending on your region, your location, a viable alternative. License plate recognition systems can be used, same kind of thing, to track from point to point elapsed travel times. Cellular telephone tracking of signal tracking, and most of you are familiar, most recently, the use of Bluetooth tracking, where the devices that emit Bluetooth signals can be monitored through some antenna systems that then match up the addresses of those readers themselves and give you point-to-point travel time very quickly and easily. Another area that I think some agencies are exploring right now as we speak is the availability of private sector data of this type that can be accessed and exchanged in various ways for use in work zone performance measurements. So you've got quite a range of possibilities in terms of data for mobility measurement. Documentation of queues, as I said earlier, can be done manually, and you can obtain good estimates of impacts, both direct indications of queuing. As we'll talk a little bit later here, that you can actually do some rudimentary estimates based on some traffic flow theory and come up with delays and travel times with just queue length data. We'll show here in a minute. Key thing, though, is if you're going to be doing that, is the better the queue pattern is documented, the better. We show here a possible manual queue length documentation form that could you provide to your field inspectors or your interns or whoever, and by specifically documenting where and hour by hour of how long the queue length is, provide you a good bit of data source. So we spent quite a bit of time talking about the data and the importance of data, and data is critical. As Tracy said, we don't necessarily have to monitor all the work zones or all the time of all the work zones, but we do have to have some type of data upon which to base our analysis and perform our analysis. I want to talk today now about two techniques that may come in handy as part of the process. And that would be one where you're, as I was just indicating, we collected queue length data, and we're interested in trying to estimate how much delay does that correspond to. If perhaps your agency has a policy on delay that you're trying to check to see whether you've met or exceeded, but all you have is queue lengths because it's a location where you didn't have other sources of data. So we'll talk about that, and then we'll also talk about how you could use spot speed, spot surveillance, electronic surveillance data, and estimate queue lengths from that in duration. What we show here is a very simple. It's based on Greenshield's linear speed flow or speed density model, and assuming that, granted, it's very simplistic, but it does allow you to try to come up with a way to at least approximate the amount of delay that somebody who entered a queue of a given length on a given type of facility is experiencing. It consists of two parts. The queue, which you assume if it has backed up from the lane closure bottleneck point, is operating at a certain average speed in queue as depicted in this equation here. And then you've got another section where it's the speed through the work zone. And if you're at congested conditions, a reasonable assumption may be that your speeds in your work zone area, once you've gotten through the queue, are probably at capacity flow. And from a linear or speed density standpoint, the half of free flow speed is what we would assume. But you wouldn't need to use that. You could use whatever your agency believes is more appropriate for capacity flow conditions. Summing those up and over time, as a hour by hour, you can very easily come up with an estimate of a delay that the user would be experiencing. A couple of caveats. Again, I think I mentioned earlier, this approach works mainly only appropriate if it's at locations where we don't normally have queues at that location, such that we can attribute the entire amount of queuing to the work zone. If it's a location where it normally experiences daily congestion, and we put a work zone in there, we're not going to be able to apply this because some proportion of it was there already, and we just may or may not have added to it. So we would either need some pre-work zone data of this type, or you would need to, hopefully this location, maybe we have some electronic surveillance or something like that to do the comparisons. Theoretically, there's nothing that says you'd have to rely on simplistic relationships here. They're just a good way to get started. If you've got folks that are more versed in traffic flow theory and want to use more advanced models, nothing wrong with doing that. Just the key of coming up with good estimates of speeds and queues and speeds through your work zones and the links thereof, and you yourself can come up with your own estimates of delay. Standpoint of trying to estimate how long the queues I'm having on locations where I've got spot sensor data is a similar kind of process. You might be a location or agency who has adopted queue length limits as your performance criteria, and here you'd want to know, well, how big or how long were my queues and what duration they were. The process is fairly simple here. You've got 5 basic steps where you've got where your location, where your work zone lane closure is, your locations of your sensors. You obtain your speed data over time at each of those sensor locations. You look where the speeds at each sensor location drop below what you've identified as a queue threshold, and the length of that duration that is below that threshold. And what you know at each sensor location where the speeds drop below the threshold is that there is a queue at that location, and so you just work yourself upstream from that, from sensor by sensor till you reach a location where the sensor's not experiencing a speed drop off, and between that point and the next downstream sensors where you estimate your queue length to be. So in this case, you can see that the queue started about a little bit after 11 at the first downstream sensor. About 45 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes later, the next sensor upstream speeds dropped and stayed there until the closure was removed. And then the third upstream sensor station didn't see a drop off at all, so we know our queue didn't extend beyond that. So, okay. All right, so we've gone through the first 4 steps. Once we've got through the point of analysis, it's important to think in our process about roles and responsibilities. Who's going to be doing the collection, responsible for the collection of the data, analysis of that data is important to be defined early on in the process. Who's making the dissemination, or how that's going to be disseminated is important, as is the decision-making responsibility. Who's going to make decisions about whether what we've seen here, in our work zones is working or not? How we're going to go about the process of assessing that. Dissemination may be everything from newsletter, information, brochures, website, all that kind of thing may be a way to do it to the public. Issuing memos internally, those kinds of things might be a way you would disseminate this information internally. A lot of flexibility, a lot of opportunities, but that should be thought of early in the process so that you don't reach the point where you've got measures and just don't know what to do with them at this point in time. As far as the dissemination, I think I got ahead of myself there. You want to consider both the key users, which may be, here I've got two key ones I think that are important. To think about your technical managers, your decision makers within your own agency, how you're going to get that information out to them, what formats they need it, how much information do they need, and then think about the public themselves, the public as well as political leaders, and what we need to say from that standpoint. So, key thing there, making sure that the measures are tailored and the messages are tailored. Same measures, but you might need a lot more detail for your certain technical folks to understand, as opposed to what you'd want to send out to the public, for example, or to say your message externally. And then 7 is always is you'll see this for most system processes. It's the refine and review and refine. Once you've established your program, your process itself, it doesn't mean you're necessarily done. You've only done the biggest bulk of the work of getting things started, but every so often you should go back and take a look at what have we learned from things. What have we changed? What have we changed? What needs to be changed? Do our measures help us? Are we able to tell good information or make good decisions based on what we're gathering? Have we been able to point on what our issues are, what our challenges are, what we need to change based on the measures that we've obtained? So that should be done. That should be an ongoing process. It ties in very nicely with the safety and mobility rule and the need for periodic process reviews, and it just makes a lot of sense. So that's the seven-step, not the 12-step program, but it's a 7-step process that we think is fairly straightforward. What we thought we'd do right now for the next few minutes is maybe go through some hypothetical examples that would help, maybe put a little more not structure, but maybe base around our process here. So you might envision yourself, if you're an agency who's just trying to get started, how you might implement what we've just talked about in this tutorial yourselves. So, we have an example here. State A is reviewing and has been looking at crash data. It's fatal crash data on an annual basis for many years, and that's been their basis of assessment. And when things are going down, it's been great, and they've been able to go and indicate that work zone crashes, fatalities have been going down in their state. Well, the last couple of years, all of a sudden they saw fatalities go up, and increased fatalities is never a good thing. So they start to wonder, why did that happen? Well, looking at strictly crashes, fatal crashes doesn't really allow you to do much more than to determine if you've got them more or less. So the agency said, you know what, we're going to change our process a little bit, and we're going to go from just looking at crashes to looking at change in a severe crash rate. This group is like me, a little old school, understood crash rates, so that's what they decided to go on, and decided that they would do that by, they couldn't look at all the work zones, so they said, well, we'll do freeway work zones, and we're going to have at the districts in this particular state evaluate 2 of its work zones annually and provide that information, and that's what we'll evaluate as at least the way to get started in this process. You notice they didn't try to do all the work zones. They didn't try to do anything in terms of other types of crashes. They're going to decided to look at strictly severe crashes. So they go through this for a year, and each district sends them 2 projects, and that they had analyzed and give them the severe crash rates on a per 100 million vehicle mile basis, and so they got the results in this table here, and they looked at it and said, well, you know what, we do see some things here. Our trends do look like a lot of our projects are seeing increases. We have some that are seeing pretty sizable increases. We see some that actually had a couple there that had a decrease in fatal or severe crashes. They're very highly variable. one of the first things they said is, well, since we've got this information, maybe we should go ahead and look at those projects a little more closely, see if we can understand the ones that went way up. Is there something in their processes or procedures that would lead us to understand or see why we had so many or such a high percentage increase in fatal or severe crashes? Conversely, the ones that had decreases, can we understand or look at those and see if there's any insights into why those particular crashes or work zones actually saw a decrease in severe crashes? So they implement that. At the same time, they say, you know what, we're also having a hard time with this highly variable information. Maybe we need to get a little help from our safety division. So they go talk to their safety division about this, and the safety division says, well, now, really what you want to do in this instance is move more to the highway safety manual approach, where we're not trying to evaluate rates, because a rate can be you might see large changes in rates even though you have small numbers of projects involved or small numbers of crashes, and that adds to the variability and that kind of thing. So they got some help from their safety division and went through a highway safety manual process where for each project they estimated what the expected crash number of severe crashes would have been if the work zone hadn't been there. This happened the following year, and then they calculated what actual number of severe crashes were and did a comparison and see the results here. And they concluded that hey, we do see some crashes that are occurring or increased that are occurring. It seems to be about a 30% increase. Now they go back and want start to analyze the crashes a little bit more, or those projects a little more detail again, and see if they can understand why in those locations where they were seeing increases, why they were. So, and this could go on an annual basis as well. Maybe they expand the number of projects, the types of roads, those kinds of things. But certainly an example of how an agency might implement a safety-based work zone performance measurement program or process. There's another example we'll take, and this one will focus on mobility. And we'll assume it's an agency. I think a number of agencies out there do have mobility-based policies. We're going to limit delays on our projects to no more than some number. This agency happened to have a policy that said we're not going to allow any more than maximum 15-minute delays for motorists. That was their policy. They, at the same time as having it over the last several years, they've noticed that they're averaging a number of complaints per month from motorists saying, hey, you're backing me up, you delayed me to my destination, what are you guys doing? Why can't you do a better job of this? And they started talking to themselves and realized we don't know whether we're meeting our goal or our policy right now. So they said, well, we're going to institute a practice to get some data, start monitoring our work zones. And they instituted a process where they're going to have their inspectors document any and all queues that occur at the projects when they're working out there working, and that they would report that back to their supervisors, and that would be sent over to the headquarters for processing. What we have here, and then they went through this whole summer construction season, and there was 31 projects in this agency. Let's say total, 3 of them were locations, or three of the projects had documentation that queues occurred. So out of the other 28, there was no instances where there was any queuing documented at those locations during any time when there was work going on. The inspector had documented the queues, and as you see here, followed our little process we talked about earlier. So they estimated some per vehicle delays, and then totaled that over the duration of the project to come up with how much total delay was generated. And as you see there's 2 locations, 2 of the 3 projects where they had very minor delays, it looked like, on average and as maximums. The first one there, they had seemed like on most of the days a very moderate level of delay being generated, but they did have at least one instance where delays were fairly excessive. So they said we need to rethink our process a little bit. As I said earlier, there's only 3 out of the 31, which is less than 10% of the projects that were actually experiencing congestion, which is good. Part of their policies looked like most of their policies being met. But they didn't know that they decided that just by looking at what they just did there with the measures that they were using, how many were being excessively delayed. They knew that they had at least that one instance where delays were very excessive, but they didn't know if they were meeting, again, their policy on a basis that should give them cause to concern, or if it was just a one-time concern. So what they did is they adjusted their monitoring and their performance measures that they wanted to include, trying to the estimate of the percent of vehicles that experiencing delays greater than 15 minutes at their work zones. So they go through recomputed results of the first project, and they realized that when they recalculated it and looked at the queuing patterns and resulting delays from that they only had a very, very small number of vehicles over each day that would exceed the 15-minute delay. They did have some. They had 1.2% that did. And that if it was a queuing condition, 15% of them, of those that experienced a queue, experienced a delay that was greater than 15 minutes. But it did help them do a better assessment of their monitoring, of their policy. And so what they decided to do, that they were going to, as the next steps, increase the amount of monitoring that they were doing. And they, in this example, they decided to hire some interns during the summer. The project engineers they had heard through the grapevine were a little concerned about the amount of effort it was taking to collect this Q-Link data by their inspectors, and so they said, well, we're going to put some more resources to the collection process. They decided then that maybe it's not just major projects. Let's extend this policy to our maintenance work zones, and so the director extended that policy to monitoring to maintenance work zones. And then they decided, since they did have that they looked like they were doing a very good job, and that they needed to get this information out to motorists, so that those that are complaining need to really understand how many, really that there wasn't a large number of work zones or a large number of motorists who were experiencing this work zones, and so they decided to implement a metric, a dashboard metric at their state DOT website that would track the percent of projects that were having delays exceeding their policy thresholds. So that's a second example. A last example I'll go through is maybe somebody who hadn't even thought about work zone performance measurement until today. They logged in just because it sounded like a good opportunity to get some technical training. Decided that Tracy and I have convinced you that that's what's necessary, so they go through the process. So starts with the director of agency, assigns the traffic operations division to establish this performance measurement program for work zones. They go through our little 7-step process, identify who some of the key staff may be. In this instance, this agency, they decide certainly the division staff, the traffic operations division staff will be critical, have a stake in this. District engineers will be as well, because the director has decided that that's going to be a part of their performance evaluations. It will be these metrics. So certainly district engineers are very interested in the process. Public Information Office, as well as the Project Design Division, where other folks at this agency decided should be involved. They looked at their performance targets. They had a policy about vehicle delays being less than 15 minutes. They established another policy where they wanted that if it had to be anybody didn't need a 15-minute delay, any user who encountered a delay was going to encounter a delay, that they be warned. At least 85% of those users who were going to be running into a delay would know in advance that they were going to be encountering a delay. That was a policy decision, a target that they established. Another one on crashes. They just wanted to establish a policy or a target that there would be no more than a 20% increase in their work zone crashes compared to expected based on Highway Safety Manual estimates. So they had those targets. They came up with 3 measures here. Monitoring individual vehicle delays during hours of delay. That seems kind of redundant, but what we're saying is we're not going to worry about delays. Obviously, if you don't have any delay present, they've opted for a customer satisfaction metric. Percent of customers who indicated that they knew when and where they were going to expect some delay, done through a survey process, if you will. And then the ratio of actual to severe crashes. This agency decided on severe crashes as well, to expected crashes. Decided their data sources. They decided they were going to use the project design division would be responsible for identifying those projects where they thought they would experience some delays, would be experiencing potentially some delays. And they set a threshold of if the peak hour V over C ratio was going to be greater than 0.9, that was a potential target, a project that might experience delays, and they would let that this would be a monitoring project of interest, if you will. Interns are going to be collecting doing travel time studies peak hour studies at the projects after each of those the phase changes at those key projects that the design division identified. And then project inspectors were to document any queues during any short-term lane closures in the district, so that they would capture that work activity amount of delay, the real short-term type of stuff. The agency assigned the local university to conduct a customer survey about the work zones in their jurisdiction, targeting that indication about were people aware of that they were going to be encountering delays when they came up on a work zone. And then the state they decided they were going to evaluate five high volume projects annually using their statewide crash database to determine if they were within the 20% increased crash rate or crash ratio of actual to expected that they had targeted. So we've got down then the data sources, the analysis requirements. The interns had quite a significant role. Safety division was providing that information on crash numbers, as well as coming up with the expected values based on highway safety manual procedures. The university had the analysis of the customer survey responsibility. The division staff, the traffic operations division staff, had a responsibility of hiring the interns, coordinating the information collected, assessing the implications of the measures on agency policies and operations once they had the measures back. And then the district's engineer's responsibility was to make it a requirement that the project inspectors were documenting the queues. So that was their role. As I said earlier, design vision, they were identifying those key projects that there was a potential for peak hour congestion to result. Safety division had responsibility for the crash analysis, or at least assisting in that. And then the Public Information Office had dissemination responsibility, summary document for the director, and then they decided they wanted to we're going to similarly be posting results on an agency website, sort of a dashboard metric kind of a thing. The methods for dissemination then were the executive summary document that we just talked about, the dashboard that was going to be on the agency website, and then they also decided they wanted to put this information out on a regular basis, so they asked for time at their annual short course to do a presentation about where the agency was with respect to performance measurements and meeting its targets on an annual basis. So, and then finally, the agency decided that it would revisit their entire process every 2 years as part of that process review assessment that is required. And in addition, all the stakeholders that we listed earlier meet to discuss expand or reduce the effort as needed, generally be called by the Traffic Operations Division when they wanted to have these periodic meetings, to determine if there's additional information that they would needed to be discussed or issues to be examined, and that would be on again as an as-needed basis. So as you can see, this third example, by the time you're done here, you might have maybe not a perfect program, but certainly made significant strides in how the amount of type of information you have and ability to make decisions based on that. So, do want to list a couple of resources that are currently available for those of you that are interested in moving forward in work zone performance measurement. A primer has been developed. Kind of the webinar itself has been structured around that particular document. There's a pilot test that documents the experiences of 6 different work zones across the country where attempts were made to gather these types of measures and document lessons learned and those kinds of things from them. And then also last year an NCHRP domestic scan was performed on work zone assessment, data collection, performance measurement, and has some good information about current practices across the country. All of these are available at the FHWA website, at the location there in the office of operations, as you see here. And with that, I think that concludes our webinar. I think Tracy and I would be happy to take any questions that have developed over the last hour, I guess it's been. So.
Yeah, Jerry, I think we do have a few questions that have come in, and we invite those of you who are viewing online to go ahead and send your questions. You'll see the box on the lower left-hand side where you can submit questions to our presenters. Our first question asks, do you have any examples of agencies who are currently doing work zones performance monitoring and measurements?
Do you want to take that one?
I can start off on that. We were aware of a few agencies doing some efforts in work zone performance monitoring. We were able to identify some other ones as well through the domestic scan that was done last year that Jerry just mentioned. A couple of examples, these are a couple different types of examples. For several years now, Ohio DOT has been doing a more intense assessment of crash data in its work zones. So usually during the winter season, pick a sampling of projects for the upcoming construction season and gather the historical crash data on that and put it into a kind of a spreadsheet analysis system that's created. And then during the project, it'll track those crashes by working with the local police agencies to get crash reports in a timely way, at least every 2 weeks, to enter the data into their system and look at how is the crash frequency during the project versus before the project. And ideally in that situation what they're looking for is any other significant differentials where we've seen crashes go up significantly. If so, something's going on out there. And let's go look into it a little bit further and see if we can identify what's going on and make some kind of corrective action there to reduce those crashes during that project. And then they've also looked at some of that data over time and have made a number of changes to their design standards for future projects to better address issues, such as providing a little longer acceleration or deceleration lanes coming into ramps, entrance to exit areas, for example, or making sure they're analyzing ramp capacity as part of their process so they don't have queues back up onto the main line when there's a project going on. So that would be one example. Another one that we learned through the domestic scan related to mobility measures is in Michigan. Michigan had allowed a certain amount of minutes of delay. I think it was 12 minutes. Does that sound right? 12 minutes of delay per work zone. And then what they would do is selective sampling in their work zones, whether it was with a trailer with a sensor on it, or sometimes interns doing travel time runs. They would monitor data at key points in the work zone at the beginning and maybe at stage changes, and then collect that and analyze it, and found that they were hitting their target. I think it was over around 90% of the time. So that was helpful to them to be able to do some sampling. And then another type of performance metric is Missouri DOT, which has done surveys both of their both kind of more intense inspections with their internal staff to rate work zones, but also any staff in the DOT could fill out a survey about any work zones that happens to drive through, and then the survey is also available online to the public. And they were looking at basically visibility, getting through the work zone, looking at traffic flow, and general assessments of safety getting through the work zone. So they were looking at a number of those kind of measures. So that would be another example of a way to do that. And in their case, the survey was on their website, so they weren't needing to mail that out to gather additional information. Of course, when you're looking at measures coming in, like ratings coming from different audiences, you need to kind of keep in mind that you kind of look at that collectively and see, because sometimes the ratings from certain groups will be higher or lower than other groups, and you need to factor that into how you use that data to make decisions. I don't know if you wanted to add any
No,
other
I think you did a good
examples.
job. Those are good.
All right. Our next question asks, what are the key challenges to implementing work zone performance measures? What are the big hurdles to overcome there?
Did we miss that in the? Okay. We had a slide that talked about that. Certainly, the biggest challenges are number one, defining the objectives that you have for your program, your process, making sure that those objectives are reasonable, that they're acceptable to all parties, all your stakeholders, that you're agreeing to track and to basically evaluate yourself to, and then that the measures themselves are useful. They allow you to track performance, track progress towards goals, to be able to assess whether there's a need to make changes, those kinds of things. The data itself, we spent quite a bit of time today talking about sources of data, how you can analyze and process data to get measures that you want. That is a challenge, and it does require staff and time, which is maybe the third key challenge is making sure that you have the adequate resources assigned to that effort. That's easy to do when you know what you're going to do with the data, that you know that the measures you're going to use and the process you're going to use to get those measures are going to yield you things that will indeed help you improve your operations, improve your processes throughout the organization. So.
I know, just to kind of tag on to what Jerry said, one thing that I know a number of agencies have said, particularly related to crash data, is there's just a long time lag in getting crash data. And it can be really hard by the time we get it. Maybe the project is totally at a different stage, or maybe the project's even done. And so one example of that was what Ohio has done, which I mentioned a little earlier, and I know some other agencies have done that, particularly when they're looking at a sampling of projects. That they are able to maybe get the data in a quicker way. I know North Carolina DOT right now has some large projects going on, 2 projects near each other on an interstate, and what they've done in that area, because it's the area even had a significant crash history without a work zone there, is they have worked with the enforcement community and those stakeholders there to get reports in a much more timely way. So they're actually getting crash information on a weekly basis, so they can look at that and identify issues, make adjustments, target enforcement efforts based on what that data is showing. So I would say maybe states that have electronic crash systems where the information goes in right away electronically have much quicker access to that data. But even if you don't have that situation in your state, if you pick, again, that's the sampling effect. Picking a target group of work zones can enable that to be manageable working with the enforcement community.
Okay, our next question asks, are there case studies on work zone mobility measures using private or third-party data sources?
I would say at the present time, not yet. I'm trying to remember. I do believe we will have at least one paper on that concept at the TRB annual meeting, which will be in January of 2012 here in Washington, D.C. Plug for that right now. So be shortly after that time, there's been a few examples of that, but to my knowledge, I'm not aware of any others that are out there at this point in time.
I know there are a number of agencies that have been looking at that, particularly when they may already be getting some of that data for their traveler information system. How can they target, some of that to look at specific work zones? So I think it's kind of in the works, but I would say, yeah, not as much, available in a, published manner yet.
Okay, good. Thank you. A couple of other questions, kind of not specifically related to the presentation are in. This webinar has been broadcast. It will be available for rebroadcast within a few hours. And also, the PowerPoint presentation will be available on the Clearinghouse in PDF format. So you'll have full access to the presentation just a few hours from now. So if you missed part of it or you have colleagues who would like to see it, be sure and refer them to workzonesafety.org to see more. All right, our next question, more of a comment. It says, doing these work zone performance measures sounds rather complicated. What is it that the agency can best gain by doing this?
I think we hopefully covered that in to some extent through the early part of the process. The gain is having measurable information that you can use and truly understand the extent of the impacts, as well as the efforts that are being taken to mitigate the impacts that are occurring. Also having the data is very useful from public outreach standpoint. That a lot of times we hear the complaints come in, and without having data measures, it's hard to argue or to indicate in a clear, concise manner that yes, that we are doing things that are trying to mitigate and make the work zone as safe and travel friendly as possible. Again, we talked about being able to use that to evaluate current processes, decide if there's a need for improvements in standards, improvements in policies and procedures, all those kind of things. The use of it's much more difficult to do when it's just a matter of trying to anecdotally make those decisions, as opposed to having actual data and measures that tell that story in a clear manner. So,
to give a few maybe specific examples of other ways, we mentioned some in the presentation, but for example, there may be, it's not uncommon in a lot of areas, particularly that have some congestion or more urban type of areas, or even some other areas that have lane closure restrictions on projects, and only allowing lanes to be closed during certain hours, maybe forcing lane closures only to nighttime, for example, based on concerns about what congestion might be caused by the work. And when you have some data, sometimes that can be used to actually say, to find out, what, those restrictions are actually more restrictive than we need to have them. We're not causing as many impacts as we thought we would out there. The travel volumes maybe aren't quite, aren't enough to cause a problem. We can actually allow the contractor more time to work, which can result in a cost savings on the project. So, there's some practical ways that the information can be used. Another way is to, if you have some data on speeding in work zones, or speeding in that road stretch of road, targeting enforcement efforts to the locations where it would be most useful. In talking with different states across the country, I find it's rare that a state can get enforcement on every work zone it wants out there because of budget concerns, because of not enough law enforcement to allow them to perform their normal duties as well as do extra patrol in work zones. Having some data about speeds, for example, could help target those efforts to the areas that are most critical. And use those resources the most effectively in the situation. So without having some kind of data and deciding that those are maybe a few key measures to look at, it's a lot harder to make those decisions, and you're kind of guessing at that, and maybe your resources aren't being used as effectively as they could be. So those are just a few specific examples.
Very good. I think our final question is, what would you recommend as a first step or the first bite of the apple for an agency who has not done much of this work in the past but is looking to get started?
Well, I guess the first step I think would be is we kind of tried to describe a staging process. So it's to start small, I would say, is one thing. To start with something manageable and to pick, maybe it's one measure, maybe two measures, but pick a few just a real short list of measures, and to look at what would be the most meaningful in the agency for what we're doing here. Like maybe the agency is having a struggle with what kind of incentives, disincentives to put on projects. Maybe that's always a big debate. And maybe having some additional information on what kind of impacts are being caused out there. Well, maybe we want to actually target travel times or cues when we have lane closures out there to decide what kind of incentive, disincentives we should put to accelerate a project. Are we spending our money appropriately? Maybe that's a debate in the agency. And that would be a key thing, to say, hey, are we putting too big of an incentive on this project or not big enough incentives? So I would say look at what, look at what are some of the key kind of questions that tend to come up on projects, and then from that pick a measure that maybe would help you answer, a question that maybe is already there. So that would be my recommendation is to really focus on the meaningful thing, something that's going to be meaningful that, and bite off a small enough, a piece that you can actually get some useful information to go forward with. And then when you have success there, I think it's a little easier to say, well, hey, we can see how we could do that over here too, and do that over here too, and get some benefit from it.
No, I agree. I think, as part of the domestic scan that Tracy and I were on, one thing we noticed was that we didn't find any agencies that are doing everything. You have some agencies that safety was their focus, and they had very good processes that had evolved. They started, just like Tracy had indicated, pretty small, and each year added to it because they had another question or they decided something else they wanted to do. Same thing, there were some states that had mobility-related metrics and processes, and they had grown over time. And so, yeah, if we gave the impression that you have to jump in and do them all, that probably would be a how we would say not to do it. You really have to learn. Each agency's got its own unique, requirements, its policies, its data sources, or its organizational requirements are all unique. And so, starting small, I would say, you start with the stakeholders, figure out who it is that have interest in these. There's who's got the questions that are most pressing and thus have a vested interest in an answer to those questions, and just go from there on an incremental basis. I'd agree completely.
Okay. Another question has come in, and it's, do you have any information regarding the number of staff that are devoted to this task only in Ohio, for example?
I can't say, I guess, specifically, but my understanding is it's not full-time staff, devoted to this area. There are some staff that work in the safety division or safety area that help with the, setting up their system for analysis, the spreadsheet that they use, that they can put the data in and do some now automated analysis because the spreadsheet's already, programmed to do that. There is someone spending some time every 2 weeks picking up the crash reports. Somebody has to go and actually do that, but that's not a full-time job for that person. So I would say it's a kind of a piece of probably several folks' duties. Somebody in the work zone, area specifically, is spending a little bit of time looking at that data each time. So I would imagine it's adding, all that added up together is probably still, not a one full person. But I would say again, it's leveraging the skills and the expertise of those who are already doing some similar things in some fashion in the agency, and then tying them together to leverage that, and add a little bit additional work to each of their, what they're doing already.
All right, very good. Well, I think that concludes our questions. We invite you, if you have additional questions or would like to discuss this, to go on to workzonesafety.org and join our listserv. And there we are able to discuss as a community a lot of these questions, and I'm sure Jerry and Tracy would be glad to jump in there if you had additional questions. Or again, you can ask one of your colleagues that may be working on this in other states. Before we conclude, we'd like to remind you that our next webinar will be on November 30th from 1 o'clock to 2:30 Eastern Standard Time. And in that webinar, we'll hear from Melissa Finley of TTI speaking on speed management in work zones. We encourage you to join us November 30th. Again, thank you for coming, and tune in to workzonesafety.org for these videos and other past webinars. All of it is on the website, and all of it is free. So take care, and we look forward to seeing you next time.